Rush into Old Navy. The entire store's on sale up to 50% off right now. Want to save even more? Redeem your Super Cash now at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Better hurry, though. Tomorrow's the last day. Excludes clearance, gift cards, register lane items, jewelry, today and 2-day only deals.
What can Quincy Enunwa do for you this year? Does Jeremy Macklin's landing spot matter for fantasy? And did you make the cut in the Pros vs. Joes Challenge this season? Plus, $20,000 FFPC winner Ryan Thurlow co-hosts with me tonight to talk about early season draft action and announce the 36 Joes representing the FFPC in the annual Pros vs. Joes competition right here next month. We've got a great show for you. Ryan Thurlow is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your special Eric Balkman Show edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football. Salutations, all you Balkaholics. Welcome to the latest episode of the Eric Balkman Show edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by myffpc.com right here on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. I am, of course, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman, and my co-host this evening is filling in for the patron saint of fantasy football, the Dizzle, Dave Gerzak. He is a former poker pro enjoying his third season of FFPC action. He's developed his own spreadsheet projection system for both dynasty and redraft leagues, where he's spent hundreds of hours working on. We're going to get into that tonight. It's helped him cash more than $20,000 in just 2 years of the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Please welcome in my co-host, Mr. Ryan Thurlow. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight, man.
Hey, how's it going, Eric? Nice to be here.
Very good, very good. Once again, I always say this at the top of the show every time we have a co-host on, but once again, we have massively upgraded the co-host chair tonight, and I thank you for coming on, man.
Well, I don't know about that, but we shall see. I've never done anything like this before. And
well, trust me, you're already ahead of the game then. Yeah, no, you're fine. You're going to be more than capable tonight in the co-host chair. And ladies and gentlemen, coming up on tonight's show, we have a lot to get to. We will be talking about whether Julio Jones has dropped off the top tier of wide receivers, what tight end will be stepping up to snare Dennis Pitta's 86 catches that have suddenly become available in that Baltimore offense, and we will announce the 2017 Joes repping the FFPC in this year's competition as well. Shout out to the chat room right now. Feel free to post any questions you guys might have in there. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, you can do so at HSFF Hour or at Eric Balkman. You can post on our Facebook page, facebook.com/HSFF Hour. If you want to chime in and talk with us, give us a call, 347-426-3682. That's 347-GAME-OBA. You can also email the show at the inbox, highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you have any questions for us, now is the time to get them to us. Our producer and mutual friend Rob and our audio engineer Bryce working extra hard tonight to make sure that we get to all those questions and tweets in the fantasy feedback segment later on in the show. The 2017 Football Guys Players Championship is live. A $250,000 grand prize, $2 million prize pool. We have drafts going on all weekend, I believe. There's more than a dozen to choose from over the next 48 hours. We're going to have more posted when those fill as well. So definitely be checking that out at myffpc.com. I don't know if you heard, we're going to be at Planet Hollywood this September, holding our live events for the FFPC out there. The main event is open, a $250,000 grand prize, $1.7 million prize pool. Get in now so you can get those early draft slots by the end of July. We definitely want you taking full advantage of that. And, of course, the satellites, Draft Experts, Superflex, $35, $77, $250 Dynasty Leagues starting at $77, all available at myffpc.com. Now, if Dave was here, he'd say, all right, enough, Balky, people are just tuning in for the first few minutes tonight. They just want to find out whether or not they made the cut for the Pros vs. Joes contest this year. And Dave's not here, so I'm going to make you wait till the very end of the show. I'm just kidding. I would never do that to you. I'm going to read off the Joes right now in no particular order. These are the 36 Joes that will be representing the FFPC in defending the belt after Blake Pyle, an FFPC Joe, won the competition, the overall competition last year. These 36 Joes will be competing for 6 main event entries to the 2018 FFPC main event. And they are as follows. Team number 1, Steve Rezas will be in the Pros vs. Joes competition. Boobs love him. Zach Giraz, Shane Gray, former guests of this show, will be on the Pros vs. Joes as well as their as team number 2. Jeff Howie also making it. Bob McGilvray, I believe. Rebob. Team Rebob. You've seen him before. He's in the Pros vs. Joes this year. Dan Thomas will also have a team in the Pros vs. Joes. Chuck Root having a team. And Chuck Root Sr., by the way, father and son team, having a Pros vs. Joes team this year. Mark Harrelson and Nelson Verbit, welcome to the Pros vs. Joes competition. You guys will be co-owning a team as well. The Chef Paul, joining PVJ this year as well. Edgar Macias, and then I know I'm going to butcher this next name, but Team 10, Sean Zidrzakowski. I'm going to guess. Sean Zidrzakowski, Looney Toonies. He is in. Team number 11, Shelby Stewart. Rich McClellan will have team number 12. He will be in the Pros vs. Joes this year. Steve McMahon and Keith Douglas splitting a team, as well as a big-time listener to the show, former guest of the show, Drew Maselli, is in the Pros vs. Joes competition for 2017. He is team 14. So you have Trevor Ross also locking up a spot. Wayne Achterberg will also be in. Don Lacknett, and of course, last week's guest on the show, Ryan Santos. He is the 18th team in the Pros vs. Joes competition this year, so congrats to him. Eric Young has a squad. Larry Parks and Blaine Para splitting a team this year. Former NBA legend, head coach, Doug Moe Jr., splitting a team in Pros vs. Joes this year. That will be fun to have them in. Steve Hutcherson will also have a team as team number 22. So we have 14 spots to go here. Chris Holland and Alex Blake. Alex Blake, by the way, who has co-hosted a broadcast of the Pros vs. Joes before. He and former guest of the show, Chris Holland, will be splitting a team. Dennis Young will have a team in the Pros vs. Joes competition. Another former guest of the show, Chris Carlson, American Mullet, will be in the contest as well. Brad Kirkland, congrats to you. You are in Pros vs. Joes. John Rozek, last year's $2,500 FFPC auction winner, will try to win another title in the Pros vs. Joes competition this year. Nolan Ortiz and John Lamb splitting a Pros vs. Joes team, as well as the dynamic duo of Kimmer Schlischer and Sean Childs, also splitting a team in Pros vs. Joes. We have Steve Lowinger and David Comite, another co-manager team, splitting a squad. That's team number 30, so we have 6 to go here. Chris Lutz and Brent Solner, also in Pros vs. Joes. Another former guest of the show, Brian Holgen. He will be splitting a team with Scott Campbell. They will be co-managing a PVJ team. Team 33 is Richard Green and Joe Holmes. Team 34 is Dan Williamson, the overhyped sleeper. Not that he is, but that's his team name, Dan Williamson. In the competition this year, the penultimate team, Joseph Lally and Kevin Carey, splitting a team, and the final squad in the Pros vs. Joes competition this year is co-managed Leon Hughes and Jim Reagan. So congrats to all 36 teams. If you didn't make it, better luck next year. There's always next year. We certainly want to thank you for participating. And hey, listen, you maybe not have gotten into Pros vs. Joes, but the fact that you're in the drawing means you're probably going to have a shot at the $250,000 grand prize in the FFPC main event. So those are the 36 teams. You will be getting an email from Darren Armani from FantasyMojo.com regarding which one of these 6 drafts works out best for you, get you lined up, and then you'll be able to draft 5 on the show as we will be covering all of those drafts right here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. Ryan, that was a lot of me talking, and I feel like we have not incorporated you enough in the show. So let's get right into it. We know that you're you formerly played poker for a living. What are you doing for a living now when you're not playing High Stakes Fantasy Football?
Yeah, I certainly did. Right now I'm a day trader. working in New York City for a firm downtown, and I really enjoy it because it uses a lot of the same skills as you would use in poker. So I trade stocks, and it's a prop trading firm, and which means that we trade the firm's own capital. So really, the only people that we're swindling are ourselves when we make poor trades. So it's a lot of fun, and that's what I do.
That's exciting, Ryan. And you say there's some transferable skills there between day trading and poker, but certainly managing fantasy football teams and managing dynasty teams specifically, knowing when is the right or the highest value you're going to get for a person, a player, nor knowing the lowest value that you can buy them at. Certainly, there's some transferable skills there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the reasons I'm really drawn to dynasty fantasy football, and I started doing Dynasty 2 years ago, and I think probably the first Dynasty podcast I listened to, one of the first podcasts I listened to was your guys' podcast, and it was really cool, and it set me off on a path of playing Dynasty fantasy football, and I got super into it, and I haven't stopped since, and I'm hoping to get better every year. And that's the goal.
Well, God bless you for listening to this show and being more excited about fantasy football rather than having the opposite reaction of making yourself want to throw up in your mouth after you listen to the show. That's awesome, man. That's what we want to hear. Listen, you have an interesting anecdote that we can bring up about your high society team here last year, Ryan. You had a good showing in the, of course, this is the 10K buy-in live event out in Vegas that is, I think, the last draft we put on every single year. You had a good season last year. You took the consolation prize, and when we were talking about this before the show, you didn't even realize you took the consolation prize, and you said you had set in your phone a reminder to set your lineup in that league every single week, just to make sure you're remaining competitive, even though you didn't make the playoffs. So that's awesome. And then you end up making $4,000 basically off that phone reminder.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things. I feel like I probably knew at the time that I took it, but I had totally forgotten. And it's even possible that I just didn't know, and set my alarm to make sure I set my lineup, and then set my lineup, and then just assume that I lost it because. I don't know. I was probably just so upset that I wasn't in the playoffs, but no, it was a really fun league, and it was the first time I had done that league. I didn't go to Vegas last year. I had played in the league and I drafted via proxy online, and I'm not entirely sure how many of the 12 participants were in Vegas for the draft, but yeah, I was one of the ones that did it online, and I decided I'm going to go out to Vegas this year and do the draft in person. So it should be a lot more fun doing them in person and meeting all the guys.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think last year we probably had 2 or 3 that did that in the High Society League. It's always interesting because, the people that are ponying up $10,000 to play in an FFPC live league, that they're super serious, they're super competitive, and they get into it big time. What was it like, Ryan, going up against, really the toughest competition that the FFPC has to offer in comparison to maybe some of the other leagues that you were in?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say the competition was much, much steeper than all my other leagues, and I was in some other pretty high-stakes leagues. I've done the 5,000 before and some of the higher stakes dynasty leagues, and I would say the $10,000 league, the players were really good, and I mean certainly all the players I wanted got drafted real early, and you never know, just because it's a high stakes buy-in doesn't mean the players are necessarily going to be good. Oftentimes in poker, you would sit down at some of the higher stakes games and you would still get some bad players. Probably the average was higher. The average skill level was higher in those games, but you really never know. So I didn't know what to expect. And I was pretty impressed. I feel like I probably got slightly out drafted. I did get slightly unlucky in that league, but I also made some poor picks. First of all, the wide receivers got drafted way earlier than any other league I was in last year. And so by the end of the second round, I think there was probably only like 3 or 4 running backs off the board,
Wow.
and Rob Gronkowski. And so my strategy was really to go wide receiver early. And I ended up going wide receiver late because I just didn't have much of a choice, or I was kind of assuming that, eventually after round 3 or 4, there'd be a big running back run, and there just wasn't. So I had to react to that, and the draft didn't go as expected.
And Ryan, it's interesting that you bring that up because you've done several drafts already in 2017, and we've heard from a lot of the guests on the show over the last month and a half, 2 months, that running backs are after last year, they're being pushed up once again. Obviously, we know what the big 3 are at the top of round 1, but in general, are you seeing the running back position in the early rounds, maybe more of them going off the board, significantly more than they were in 2016?
I am. Yeah, I definitely am. And I think that's due to different reasons. First, there are just running backs in clear situations at the top this year. I know last year we had Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson were obvious. Ezekiel Elliott less so. And some of the running backs this year are just in better situations overall. But on top of that, I know that a lot of the running backs just overall in the NFL scored a lot more touchdowns than they have in years past. And I do think that is one of the main reasons why in general running backs are being pushed up and scored higher last year than they normally do. I think that running backs scored on average about 42% of the offensive touchdowns last year, as opposed to around 33% or something like that in the year before.
Interesting.
So people are going to probably overdraft running back due to that reason. It should probably be somewhere in the middle, I would say. Not as wide receiver heavy as last year, but it probably shouldn't be as running back heavy as it's going to be this year.
Now, once again, us fantasy players just overcorrecting and just going overboard in trying to fix what we did last year. So that's interesting that you point that out. Now, when of course we're talking with Ryan Thurlow, a $20,000 FFPC career winner over the last 2 years here on the show tonight. Ryan, when you're doing these draft expert squads and drafting them here in the May, June part of the year, are you ever trying out different strategies like, hey, what happens if I grab a couple of tight ends early here? What happens if I go 0 RB here? What happens if I take a couple of stud running backs here? Are you ever trying different strategies out like that as far as building different types of teams? Or are you just simply taking, by and large, a best player available approach?
Well, I would say I'm trying to take the best player available approach. The problem with that is as the summer goes on, oftentimes my idea of the best approach changes slightly. So I do end up doing different strategies sometimes as the summer goes on. But it's basically just trying to improve and figure out what's working the best against the players during the summer. And yeah.
Dave Gerzak always says, because people have asked us, oh, why don't you guys put out rankings or who do you like better between this guy and this guy? And oftentimes, I know I will, and Dave has done this too. Dave will say look, ask me this question now and it's this, but if you ask me again in 2 weeks, I might change my mind. Everything's fluid. And I think not only with trying to build different teams up, but taking the best player available approach, depending upon when you're drafting, best player available could be radically different in the same parts of each round. Exactly. So I think that's a good point to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, I want to specifically talk about another position change that we saw in the NFL this week, and it was Andre Ellington again. Cardinals decided that, whatever it was, the 3 weeks they gave him at receiver, he wasn't cutting it, so they move him back to running back this coming year. So are you starting knowing that Ellington is leaving that wide receiver core? Are you starting to like guys like Chad Williams, J.J. Nelson, Jerron Brown more as sleepers in these DEs you're doing right now? Or are you just looking at Fitz and John Brown as the only really viable wide receivers in this offense?
Yeah, I certainly am looking at them a bit more than I was in the past because I do think Ellington's a good player, and I figured he would probably be a good wide receiver, at least in the slot. But, Larry Fitzgerald is there now, and he'll be playing the slot for at least the next year or so, unless he gets hurt. And I don't know. I kind of just assumed that they put Ellington there because he just wasn't cutting it as a running back. And they seem to not really know how to use him just because he's probably just not that good anymore. And as far as the other guys go, I can't. Arizona is definitely probably the hardest wide receiving core to read at the moment, but the top two wide receivers there are for sure Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson. And so, I'm not really sure I want to be battling it out for the third wide receiver spot in Arizona, especially when it's so unclear. And I watched a lot of the prospects coming out of college just on Draft Breakdown, and I wasn't a big fan of Chad Williams. I've never really been a big fan of John Brown, and especially in Dynasty, because he's got so many injuries. He's always dealing with something. I think he's got a sickle cell thing. He's had concussions. And so for me, it's mostly a stay away.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think obviously anybody who did that last year, they were happy that they did not have Brown on their team. We have so much more to talk about with Ryan Thurlow, a career winner of $20,000 in the FFPC. But we are going to take a quick break. When we do come back, we're going to talk about Julio Jones, whether he's still on the top upper echelon of wide receivers in fantasy football. You are listening to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour with Eric Balkman and Ryan Thurlow right here on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. Welcome back to the HSFF Hour. I am Eric Balkman. My co-host tonight, Dave Gerzak, is off. So we have Ryan Thurlow, a career winner of $20,000, more than $20,000 in the FFPC, co-hosting tonight, chatting about some Arizona receivers. Before the break, let's get in and talk a little bit about the receivers going off at the top of the first round in FFPC drafts right now. Those guys, Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, obviously we know all those guys. When you know, Ryan, that those three are usually available in the 4 to 6 spots in the first round. I mean, not always, but by and large, they're available. Would you make the case that the fact that Julio Jones has been so bit by the injury bug over the last few years, especially in crunch time, that in the playoff, the money weeks, weeks 14 to 16 of the FFPC, knowing that he has been so hard hit by nagging injuries, do you think that puts him behind those other three guys? Would you be taking Beckham, Evans, and Brown all before Julio Jones this year?
Honestly, I am going to go the other way on that, actually, because to me, Julio Jones is the most talented wide receiver in the NFL, and he's always right at the top. And despite him having nagging injuries and missing several games pretty much every year, he's always finishing, in the top 6 wide receivers. And I think he was 6th last year in PPR or so after missing several games and missing several snaps, honestly, in the games that he did play in. And I just think if he can put together a whole season where he stays healthy, I see him putting up the most points. Pretty much everyone else in the first round has some questions. I have some questions about. Antonio Brown might lose a couple targets a game to Martavis Bryant, assuming he's going to be playing. You never know about the status of Ben Roethlisberger. And Odell Beckham could lose a few targets to Brandon Marshall. And that whole Giants passing game is going to be stacked this year. Now, of course, I expect Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown to get close to the same amount that they've had in the previous years. But, no, I like Julio Jones probably the best out of all of them.
Well, I'm just curious, just thinking about this, hearing you answer that question. When you have looked at the teams that you've drafted so far, is there a favorite spot that you've liked, the top three or the middle or maybe the back end? Is there a favorite draft spot or draft area that you have liked maybe a little bit better than the rest of them so far this season?
There definitely is. I'd much prefer getting one of the top running backs, I would say. I would say that Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson both just give you a massive advantage. And so if I would be able to choose that, I would take the first or the second spot and then go from there. I've probably done 20 drafts so far this season, and I've gotten in the top two spots about once, I think. But I've been drafting in the 9 to 12 range pretty much all season, and it's okay. But I think I'd much rather have one of those two. And then after those, the top two running backs, which I wouldn't necessarily put Ezekiel Elliott in that category. I'd probably prefer being in the middle. I just like drafting somewhat in the middle so that you sort of know around every 12 players that get drafted, you sort of have an idea of who's going to be there for you in the next round. And when you draft, at the turn, and you have to pick two players at one time, it's really hard to predict who's going to be there in your next picks after that. So I like being somewhere in the middle.
Let's talk a little bit about the Eagles passing game and what they have done this year. They've made some radical changes. We talked a little bit about it on the show ever since the start of free agency, but I want to get your opinion, Ryan. Where does the draft value lie among the Eagles pass catchers this year? If you had to invest in one of these guys, let's frame it that way. If you had to invest either in Ertz, Jeffrey, Jordan Matthews, Torrey Smith, Darren Sproles, knowing where they're going in drafts since you've done so many of them, has there been an Eagle that you found yourself really targeting or investing in more than the others?
Honestly, don't think I've drafted any Eagles players this entire offseason. I liked Wentz coming out of college, but after the first year, he showed a little bit in the beginning of the season and tailed off quite a bit. I'm worried he's going to be able to sustain more than one wide receiver, and because of that, I'm not entirely sure who to pick. Alshon is a pretty good wide receiver, but he's never really proven that he's an elite wide receiver to me, and of course he's always injured. I like Jordan Matthews' talent a lot, but he's in the slot. He'll be competing for targets with Zach Ertz, and his ceiling is not as high as Alshon's, just because his yards per catch is going to be slightly lower, being in the slot position and Zach Ertz. Well, I do think he's a pretty good tight end. He's going to be competing more for targets with the new wide receivers in town. So honestly, I'm not really targeting any of them. Sproles will be competing with two other running backs for targets. And to me, the Philadelphia passing situation is a stay away as well.
That's interesting. Okay. All right. Well, good stuff there. Let's head out west, as they say. Knowing what Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders were able to do with Trevor Siemian under center last year, and they both performed pretty well. Are you rooting for Siemian if you own Thomas or Sanders? Are you rooting for Siemian to get the job again in 2017, or do you think that there's actually a higher upside if Paxton Lynch becomes the quarterback for Denver, that maybe Thomas and Sanders see their values and maybe their ADP go up a little bit more if Lynch is the quarterback? If you own those guys or if you plan on drafting them, who's the quarterback that you want to see throwing to him this season?
Yeah, I would say I would be rooting for Paxton Lynch because he's more of a gunslinger mentality. And Trevor Siemian, while he seems pretty decent, pretty solid, he's really not going to spread the field and open the field up for more than there's just those two wide receivers. So I'd be rooting for Paxton Lynch, despite not knowing whether he's a good player or not. If not, he should still see enough volume, I would say, to be good for both Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. And I would say I've been getting a fair amount of both of those players, although not. They're probably on about 30% of my teams.
Let's check it out right now. Demaryius Thomas going on average at the 307 in drafts right now, in FFPC drafts right now. And then Emmanuel Sanders going at the 608. So, Ryan, conceivably, if you wanted to, and I don't know how many people would want to do this, but I think that there's a good amount of them, if they see value in the Denver passing game, they would not only grab both these guys, but grab both of these guys in the same league. For sure, yeah. It's certainly possible. In the drafts I've been doing, it seems like Demaryius Thomas is getting a little overlooked, and I see him in the fourth round quite a bit. So when he's there, then I certainly have no problem taking him. They've both been getting around 25% each of the passing volume in that offense, and it can't really afford to go down any if they're going to beat their ADP. And if there is another wide receiver or tight end that emerges there, it's possible it could go down a bit, which is a little scary, but they're both so good at wide receiver that I'm not too worried. They're both proven commodities as well. It's not like these guys are rookies. We know what they can do. We've seen them do it. Plan on seeing them do it again this year. Tonight's guest, tonight's co-host, really, Ryan Thurlow, a career winner of the FFPC $20,000 in prizes. So congrats to you on that, my friend, and thanks so much for hanging out. I'm Eric Balkman. Of course, this is the HSFF Hour, and let's go to a couple of emails for you, Ryan, tonight that we got in. First one is from Steve in Louisville, not Louisville, Louisville, South Carolina, unless they pronounce it Louisville, but it reads Louisville. He says, Ryan, I honestly can't remember Doug Baldwin ever going this high in drafts before. What am I missing that everyone else seems to get, or are they just nuts? Good luck this season. That is Steve in Louisville, South Carolina. And he brings up a point. I'm kind of agreeing with him that on this. I've seen Doug Baldwin go in the second round before, in the mid-second, which is kind of like raising my eyebrow a little bit. But his ADP is at 304 right now, so solidly in that early third-round conversation. You see a lot of people drafting Doug Baldwin. Maybe they get Elliott or Bell or Johnson in the first round, and they go receiver, and Baldwin is a guy that they are adding as either their number one receiver or number two receiver. How do you feel about Doug Baldwin at that spot this year, Ryan?
Yeah, I don't think he's missing much, honestly. Baldwin is a pretty good player. He plays out of the slot predominantly, and he never used to get near the volume that he's been getting the last 2 years, and that's one of the main reasons for his breakout. Russell Wilson has been playing a lot better, since his first year and a half. Last year, he didn't play as great, injuries, but with Russell Wilson really slinging it around and Seattle throwing the ball quite a bit, Baldwin has performed really well. He's also stayed very healthy, which is certainly extremely helpful in season long. And I just think, it all being equal, if all the top wide receivers are going to stay healthy, I don't think Baldwin should be in the top 12, top 15 of them. They've got some other guys who are very talented as well. Tyler Lockett, Jimmy Graham, C.J. Prosise, and Paul Richardson. And I think they could eat into some of his targets this season. But I do like Doug Baldwin as a player, and I would be drafting him probably in the fourth or fifth round if he was still there.
When you, Billy Joel, in the chat room right now, Billy Joel 166 says Allen Robinson is going to bounce back big time this year, and Robinson is one of those receivers going in the third round after Doug Baldwin, going at the 309 right now in FFPC drafts, actually right behind Demaryius Thomas. If it came down to it, Ryan, you would rather have Allen Robinson over Doug Baldwin this year, correct?
Honestly, it's pretty close. I think I might have Doug Baldwin, just because Allen Robinson last year was he played okay, but the quarterback situation was atrocious, obviously, with Blake Bortles. And it's not going to get any better because Blake Bortles is still there. Their defense is going to improve, which means they're going to throw the ball less. And they probably will run the ball a lot more than they were last year as well, which is because they have Leonard Fournette, and they're going to change their offensive style for Leonard Fournette. So honestly, I'm not sure Allen Robinson is even going to be in my top 24 wide receivers this year.
Wow, interesting. Okay. All right, I can see that. I can see the argument there. This is another email that we got, and this is more of not a philosophical question, but this is from Mike in Franklin, North Carolina. He says, Ryan, do you like joining the high-stakes leagues for the prospect of winning a ton of cash or to see how you measure up against really serious competition? That is Mike in Franklin, North Carolina. Thank you for the email, Mike. Ryan, I'm assuming he's talking about the leagues like the High Society League. It's probably a mixture, I would imagine, or both, that yes, you want the opportunity to win a lot of money, but you also want to see how good am I really at fantasy football.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely for the money somewhat, but it's mostly just for fun, honestly. And it's a lot more fun when you're playing for high stakes if you can afford it. And I like pitting myself against the best players that there are, just whatever I do. And I expect to fail quite a bit in the beginning, and I've certainly done my fair share of that. But no, I would say I play for fun and just the intellectual pursuit of doing it. So just any money that I win is the cherry on top.
The cherry on top, indeed, Ryan. The cherry on top of the opening segment here of our show, your interview. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, and I know you don't want to reveal too much, given that the highest of high stakes players are no doubt tuned in tonight to listen to this massively popular podcast. But what, if I had to ask you, what is a player that is being drafted right now in the first few rounds that you see as a big-time bust? We obviously talked a little bit about Allen Robinson there, and you don't view him as a top 20 receiver this year, so I guess he would qualify as an answer to this question. But a guy being drafted that you don't see yourself taking in the first few rounds this year, and then maybe a guy later on in the double digits, or maybe post-round 15, post-round 20 if you want to get super deep in some of these DEs that you've done, a guy that you've been acquiring there in a lot of spots because you feel the value there, the upside dictates it. So a bust and a sleeper that you can give us tonight, sir.
Sure, no worries. I think there are probably a lot of guys in the first two rounds that I am not ever drafting. The first one would probably be Brandon Cooks. I guess he's going overall 26. I probably wouldn't take him in the first 3 or 4 rounds, honestly. I definitely think that he could be a value around there, but I just don't see him getting enough volume in the Patriots passing offense. I think Amari Cooper is going way, way too high. I think he's a decent player, but from what I have watched of him, he's not good enough to be going in the top 2 rounds, I would say. So honestly, Amari Cooper would probably be my most overrated player, with Brandon Cooks in there, and Dez Bryant, just for the fact that he doesn't get enough volume to be a wide receiver 1. And let's see, as far as guys I'm getting late in the draft experts drafts, I'd say I've got a lot of Taylor Gabriel, who's a big play threat, who could potentially get a real nice role if Julio Jones goes down, which he seems to do a lot. And let's see, I've gotten a lot of Marvin Jones and Kenny Britt as well.
That's interesting. I like Britt this year too, especially for where he's going. I think it makes a lot of sense to grab him on those DEs. I want to get back to just real quickly on Brandon Cooks because Dave and I talked on this show about, and we always bring it back to the year that the Patriots had Wes Welker, Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, and Brandon Lloyd, and all 4 of those guys were being drafted very high, and Dave said, look, one of these guys is going to be a bust. That you just cannot draft 4 pass catchers from the same offense in the first 3 rounds or whatever it was, first 4 rounds, and expect them to hold their value. And he was right. I mean, they did not all hold their value that year. We had Aaron Hernandez because of an injury, but Brandon Lloyd was a massive bust that year as well. For you, Ryan, when you look at the Patriots this year, Brandon Cooks being drafted high, Julian Edelman, he's dropped off a little bit, but he is still being drafted fairly high. Obviously, we know where Rob Gronkowski is going. So of those 3, you expect Gronk and Edelman to hold their value, where Cooks probably is not going to hold value.
I do think so. I do think they all kind of drop a little bit because they are all so good. They will all eat into each other's targets. I do like Gronk quite a bit this year just because he's Gronk. And B, he missed a lot of time last year, obviously, but I do think without Martellus Bennett, I think they're downgrading slightly, going from Martellus Bennett to Dwayne Allen. And I think that Gronk will actually get a lot more looks this year. They use him as a blocker quite a bit, especially the year prior to last year. They used him a lot as a blocker because their offensive line was terrible. Last year it was slightly better. It was much better last year, and this year their offensive line is going to be pretty solid too. So because of that, I think they'll be able to use him in the passing game a lot. And I've always liked Edelman. I think he was one of the most underrated players. Just because he's a slot receiver doesn't mean that he can't be one of the best receivers in the league. And but when I watched him last year, I do think his play actually dropped off somewhat significantly. And it wasn't all that noticeable because Tom Brady is Tom Brady. And because the rest of the wide receivers did a great job of getting open and allowing him to kind of work underneath and do his thing. But I am a little bit worried about Edelman going forward, especially in Dynasty. I got rid of him in a couple leagues. And so that's probably where I stand on those 3.
That's where you stand on the Patriots, but we don't know where you stand on so many other topics that we're going to get to after the break, including Eric Decker, Jeremy Maclin, so much more. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. I'm Eric Balkman. Ryan Thurlow, a $20,000 career winner in the FFPC, co-hosting tonight. We'll be right back in a minute, right here on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. The HSFF Hour rolls on here in this beautiful mid-June weather we are having in northeast Wisconsin. Fantastic to be up here, and you're missing out. I'm Eric Balkman, slightly above average host of this show. Ryan Thurlow, $20,000 FFPC career winner, co-hosting with me tonight as the Dizzle is getting the Nizite is off. We want to get into your tweets, your emails. We're going to do that a little bit later. Let's get into the news that is going around the NFL right now. Thanks to Football Guys, thanks to Roto World, thanks to Rob for tonight's rundown as we get into it. And the first thing I want to bring up tonight, let's go to the worst team in the NFL and talk about them. Eric Decker has been informed by the Jets that he will either be released or traded this week, according to sources. This posted to Twitter by Adam Schefter from ESPN. This is something that had been talked about for the majority of the offseason, the possibility of the Jets not only letting Brandon Marshall go, but letting Eric Decker go as well. And it appears that both of them will be in new uniforms next year. Eric Decker does have a cap hit of $8.75 million this year, $3 million in dead money, and it appears that he will be in a new uniform by the time September rolls around. How many years, Ryan, do you think that Eric Decker has left in the league? Can he be a top 25 receiver in 2017, depending upon where he lands?
Top how many did you say? Top 20?
Top 25, so like essentially like a wide receiver 2.
Probably not, unless he lands in Baltimore, which is actually probably pretty likely. I would say he's a very good player. He's always scored a ton of touchdowns, which I'm not sure you can necessarily count on every year, but he seemed to be pretty consistent at that in the past. I think Baltimore would be a great landing spot. If he went to Buffalo, forget about it. it's pretty dependent on where he goes and how much opportunity he'll have. But I do like Eric Decker as a player. I think he's pretty good. He's never really excited me as a player, but I know there are a ton of Eric Decker lovers out there, and they love everything that he does, and I understand it, but I'm not a huge Decker fan, honestly. I think he can land in the top 25 if he goes to Baltimore. If he goes to, I don't know. There's really not that much opportunity on other teams at the moment, but I don't think he's going to do much in the Jets either, just because that team is going to be so terrible this year.
Yeah, it is going to be a very bad team, and you can tell because apparently their number one receiver is named Quincy Enunwa. If Decker is let go, Enunwa expected to be the Jets' number one wide receiver this season, starting opposite the deep threat with let's call it fungible hands, Robbie Anderson, who got open quite a bit down the stretch last year and got a lot of targets. Did not catch very many of them. Those are your starting Jets receivers right now. Darius Stewart expected to be the number 3 receiver. I believe I just saw on the newswire that he actually has a thumb injury, some sort of hand injury, so he might be behind the 8 ball coming into the season as well. Eric Decker last year for the Jets. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You said Darius Stewart is the guy with the hand injury?
Yeah, I thought it was like I'd have to look it up, but I thought it was like a thumb or something, and they didn't expect it to be serious at all. But anytime a rookie is missing reps, that's always a red flag for me as far as looking at him for redraft. You look at what Eric Decker did for the Jets last year. Averaged 7 targets a game when in the games he was healthy. Brandon Marshall was still the number 1 there. He averaged 8.5 targets a game. Both of those guys essentially going to be gone this year. Enunwa saw 105 targets last year. We could see him expound on that quite a bit in 2017. How good of a season, Ryan, do you think Quincy Enunwa has in front of him? And what type of round or what area in drafts would you be looking at drafting Enunwa now?
I would say Enunwa has always been an enigma to me. He's very... He looks like such a big guy. He looks kind of like a tight end, and then yet he's very fast, and he kind of sneaks up on you. I honestly can't see him being a number 1 wide receiver if he's going to go against top cornerbacks. I think he's going to get eaten alive. I don't know if he will be up against top quarterbacks, but I'm assuming they're going to use him in the X wide receiver position. And if so, I think it's going to be very bad for him. I do have him projected for 20% of the passing volume there, which would be about 110 targets. And the problem with that, if he gets about 20% of the passing volume, he's probably going to be scoring less than a quarter of a touchdown a game, and that it will not add up to very many fantasy points by the end of the year. So I probably wouldn't draft Enunwa in the top 25 rounds, honestly. I know a lot of people are going to be quite high on him because he is the number 1 for that team, probably, at this point. I do like Darius Stewart as a player. Hopefully he's not too injured and is able to see some snaps in that Z wide receiver role. I think he could be good. It's certainly possible that Enunwa replaces Decker in the slot, and if he does, it's probably a good spot for him. I would probably up his projections somewhat, but I really don't like any player in this offense besides Bilal Powell, and maybe Matt Forte if Bilal Powell goes down. ASJ could be an interesting player. But they were pretty run heavy last year, and despite having a really bad team, they ran the ball quite often, and I expect them to be slightly, around 60% pass, which for a team that was down a lot isn't that much. So I expect them to be running it. And I do like Chad Hansen. I like our Darius Stewart. Not a big fan of Robbie Anderson. He's very fast, but he certainly can't run routes well at all. And not a big fan of any of them, honestly.
Yes, and you got to believe that the Jets probably aren't huge fans of what of the talent they have in there right now as well. So that it's going to be tough to watch this year. Sorry to Jimmy Wagner, Jets fan in the chat room right now. But he's of the opinion, and this is an interesting point too, that the Jets will probably do just enough to screw them out of a franchise quarterback in next year's draft. So everybody's expecting gloom and doom, 2-14, 3-13. Maybe they go 7-9 or 8-8, and then miss out on the quarterbacks too. So that would be certainly interesting to watch. Let's go to Los Angeles here now and talk a little bit about Mike Williams, who is going to be held out for the rest of the offseason program, as he is still recovering from a disc injury in his back. This, according to Adam Schefter of ESPN. The Chargers do expect Mike Williams back in time for training camp. I can't imagine that they'll be running him very hard through practices in training camp. And again, this is, I mentioned it earlier, missed time and missed reps for rookies, especially receivers. That is bad, especially for redraft. You have a lot of people who are very high in him in dynasty drafts, Ryan. But as you look at, Keenan Allen coming back, the expected emergence of Hunter Henry, you still have Gates and Benjamin, Tyrell Williams, who showed a lot last year. There's a lot of different options in Chargers camp right now. At what point do we start saying that we can't draft Mike Williams for redraft if he continues to miss time, if this back injury doesn't get better? Because the more time he misses, the harder it is for him to make a significant impact as a rookie.
Yeah, it's certainly getting towards that point. I've probably got Mike Williams in 3 or 4 of my drafts in like the, 18th, 20th round or something like that in these draft experts leagues. But I didn't draft him in Dynasty at all because I liked a lot of the other players there in that first round. I think he's an okay talent, but I do like Tyrell. I'm a huge Keenan Allen fan. I think he's going to get at least 25% of the target share in that offense, Keenan is. And I think if Mike Williams is out, I'll have to bump Tyrell up quite a bit. Bump up Hunter Henry as well. I think if both Keenan and Tyrell stay healthy, I don't think Mike Williams will see all that much volume, even if he is healthy. So if he's not healthy, it's not looking good for him, for sure.
Well, it wasn't looking good for Jeremy Maclin in Kansas City this year, so they released him, and he is a free agent right now looking for a new team. He's already visited with Buffalo. He left Baltimore, his visit with the Ravens, without a contract. John Harbaugh, who met with Maclin there, said that Maclin actually had a wedding to attend this weekend. Maclin really hasn't visited anybody else other than those teams. I haven't really heard him mentioned, rumored to sign with any other teams other than those teams. So let's talk a little bit about what Maclin could do for your fantasy team this year if he signs in Buffalo or if he signs in Baltimore. Ryan, where would you rather see, if you own Maclin or if you've already drafted him, where would you rather see him land?
Well, I'd much rather see him land in Baltimore if I'm a Maclin fan. And if he goes to Buffalo, forget about him as far as I'm concerned. And then I think there are some other spots actually that would be good for him. I think he could go to Arizona. He would certainly push Larry Fitzgerald for targets even. I think Macklin's a decent talent. I don't think he was nearly as good as his stats were the year he played for Chip Kelly, just based on all the volume he got that year. But I think he's a decent enough player still, assuming he's recovered from his injuries from last year, that he could get some significant volume in an offense. And I think there are maybe 1 or 2 other teams that could potentially sign him as well. I know Baltimore actually has significant cap trouble They're pretty close to being over the cap already. So they would have to rework some contracts to get a guy like Macklin or Decker into their cap, but they could still do it. And I do think it's even possible that we see Detroit get rid of either Golden Tate or Marvin Jones. They both have like a $6 or $7 or $8 million cap hit this year that they could save by cutting them. And that's just kind of a random hot take. I think he could be signed by a guy by a team like Detroit.
Very interesting. Well, keeping it in Baltimore, let's talk about Dennis Pitta, who has dislocated his hip for the third time. 32 years old. It appears that he has played his last NFL down. The Ravens did clear some cap space. As you mentioned, they are not in the greatest cap situation. They saved $2.5 million this year that they could put towards two guys we talked about, Jeremy Macklin, Eric Decker, or another receiver if they wanted. You look at the Ravens tight end situation in Baltimore right now, Ryan, and it's a cavalcade of some has-beens, some never-wases. Ben Watson, Crockett Gilmore, Max Williams, Darren Waller. Is there anybody there that you think will see an uptick in value for FFPC leagues this year, or is it a situation where you just want to stay away and see if they do land Macklin or Decker?
Well, I certainly haven't been staying away. I've been kind of targeting that position, trying to get anybody who I think is going to be there. I think Crockett Gilmore actually has a pretty nice chance with Ben Watson still being injured and not being able to practice right now. Ben Watson has been hurt for a long time, and he's getting up there in age. Crockett Gilmore, I think, is practicing already. He was very good when he is on the field. And I do think Max Williams would be good too. But he's also been hurt most of his career as well. So if it's going to be, if I had to choose one of the three of them, I would probably take Crockett Gilmore, and I have been in several weeks. But of course, I can't have certainty over 50% or something like that. But I do think it's going to be such a high-scoring spot to be in that I would like to take a few chances there.
You might as well, especially given where these guys are going in drafts right now. Nobody is paying too much to get any of these tight ends, so it is well worth spending that little draft capital to get a lot with the upside that these guys could provide in a tight end premium scoring league.
I think if Decker actually goes there, I'm going to like that tight end situation less, just because Decker would get a lot of the over-the-middle targets himself.
Speaking of guys who may not have anything left, Jamal Charles has been participating in light drills with the running backs during OTAs this week in Denver with his new team. People are still drafting him in the FFPC. He's still going in the 10th, 11th round. So obviously there are people believing that Charles is going to have a fantasy impact this year. Maybe it's just as a handcuff. Maybe it's just a third down back. But they wouldn't be drafting him if they didn't think he had anything left. What about you, Ryan? Have you hit on Charles in many leagues? Is he a guy that you're looking at, given his track record and the fact that you can get him in a double-digit round right now?
No, I don't have Charles on any of my teams this year. I like Spencer Ware as a player. I like Kareem Hunt as a player, and I don't really want a running back who can't seem to stay healthy in a three-way committee. Even if it is Jamal Charles, and even if it is in Kansas City with Andy Reid, I don't think he necessarily would be the touchdown or the goal line back in there. So I don't think his touchdown upside would be high. And so, no, I haven't gotten any Jamal Charles this year. I kind of see him in that Sproles type of role where he's catching as many passes as he can. But I also think there's a significant chance that he even gets cut before the season, maybe as high as 50%. And so for me, I'm staying away.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. This is a guy that's going in. Again, it's hard to rip on anybody for a pick in the double-digit rounds, but you're also talking about investing a 10th or 11th round pick on a guy that really doesn't have a roster spot sewn up. So I think that is important to think about when you are on the clock in those rounds and considering Charles. And the last two guys I want to talk about in this segment before we get to our final break, two guys that you just mentioned, Kareem Hunt and Spencer Ware, that you like them both as players, and Hunt is now in the fold in Kansas City as he signs his rookie deal this week. It's interesting because I've heard a lot of talk about Kareem Hunt maybe being the guy this year, but you look at how the FFPC players are drafting him, and Kareem Hunt's going in the 10th round right now, whereas Spencer Ware is going in the 5th round. So there's a significant distance between these two guys that are supposedly fighting over that starting running back spot. How do you fall in on this, Ryan? Would you rather invest a 5th round pick on Ware, a 10th round pick or 11th round pick on Kareem Hunt, or try to get both, or stay away from either of those guys?
I think they're both priced pretty well, honestly. I like Spencer Ware as a player, and I don't think he's just going to cede the role to Kareem Hunt right away, if at all. And so I probably would be taking Spencer Ware right around where he is. And Kareem Hunt, I kind of see in that Derrick Henry role, honestly, where if he gets a chance and Ware goes down, he would be a running back one for you, provided that Jamal Charles is not going strong. And but as far as it goes right now, he'll have a small role in the offense, I think, to start the year. But I don't think it'll be significant to be fantasy relevant right away, at least. And so I think he's more of a handcuff. So 10th round sounds about right.
It does sound about right, and it sounds about right that it's time to take our last break of the show tonight. I'm Eric Balkman. Ryan Thurlow, a $20,000 FFPC career winner, joining me in the co-host chair tonight here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. Emails, tweets, and more, all coming up right here on the Fantasy Sports Radio Network. Final segment of the weekend here on the HSFF Hour. Congratulations to all of you who got in as a FFPC Joe in the Pros vs. Joes contest that we had announced earlier at the top of the show. We will be rooting for you to continue the tradition of FFPC Joes winning that competition. You can go back and download this later, or listen to the beginning to see if you got chosen, or you can just check your email inbox, because you'll probably be getting emails from either Darren Armani from Fantasy Mojo or from Chris Lambert from the FFPC, getting you squared away for that competition. Let's, before we get to that and talk about the Pros vs. Joes and cover those drafts, we do have the matter of answering your tweets and emails.
Got a question for Eric Dave or tonight's guest? Send them a tweet at HSFF Hour on Twitter. Email the show at highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. Post it in the chat room during the broadcast. Hashtag your tweet with HSFF, or just smack Eric in the head. That's highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com or at HSFF Hour on Twitter.
Kicking things off tonight, we have a tweet from @BC Kirkland. Of course, Brad Kirkland, who was one of the Joes selected. Congratulations to you, Brad. He tweets at us, for tonight's show, who do you like better, Cameron Meredith or Quincy Enunwa? Thanks. Well, Ryan, you talked about not liking Enunwa. I'm assuming that you like Cameron Meredith better than Enunwa this year.
Boom, Cameron Meredith, by far. I'm a big Cameron Meredith fan. He's 6'3", he's fast, he runs good routes, catches the ball in traffic. I think he's going to be a good player.
Yeah, and again, I don't understand this. I mean, he's barely going in the 10th round of drafts. I'm a fan of his this year. I think he is well worth his value there. He makes a lot of sense if you need a receiver going into that 9, 10, 11th range. You can only probably do worse than Meredith there. I really like him, and I'm sure I'll have him a lot this year. Let's go to emails. George in Zanesville, Ohio. What do you make of Adam Teicher's report that Tyreek Hill won't start for the Chiefs even in the wake of Macklin's release? Thanks, fellas. Thanks for the email, George. This was kind of interesting that I saw after Macklin had got released last week. Adam Teicher, who I think is the ESPN reporter for the Chiefs, wrote a story on Monday saying that it would be Wilson and Conley, Albert Wilson and Chris Conley starting, and then Tyreek Hill, coming in after that. I thought that was interesting. Why wouldn't you want your best playmaker on the field as much as you can, especially when Andy Reid had already said, look, we got to get this guy on the field more. I mean, clearly the fact that Kansas City is releasing Maclin makes me believe that they have a lot of faith in both Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill this year. So even if Hill doesn't start, I got to believe that they are going to be running a large chunk of that offense through him. So for me, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference if he starts, if he doesn't start, because I know that he is a playmaker that the Chiefs need on the field in order to win football games. What's your take on Tyreek Hill, Ryan?
Yeah, that's certainly the $1 million question this offseason. And I really don't know where to stand on Tyreek Hill. He certainly has quite a bit of talent, very fast. He runs good routes, catches the ball well. I don't really have any knocks on Tyreek Hill, and I think his ceiling could be pretty high. But I am worried that he won't be on the field, more than 70% of the time. If that's the case, his ceiling can't be that high. I've got him slated for 19 or 20% of the passing volume in that offense, which it's not a very high pass offense with Alex Smith. That could definitely change if they switch quarterbacks mid-season or even next year. And I do think that he will get some end arounds out of the backfield, probably around 30 or 35 of those throughout the season. I'm not sure if he's going to be in the red zone packages just because of his size, but if he is, I do like him a fair amount. He does kind of have a mean streak to him, a little bit in the Steve Smith light sector. So I like Tyreek, but I do think Travis Kelce will be the most targeted receiver in that offense. I think the running backs will get a lot of targets, and aside from those two guys, I'm not sure I could really get into anyone else. I do have a favorite sleeper on that team, but you probably won't see him this season, at least on the offensive side of the ball. I think he'll play a lot of special teams. I like Jehu Chesson. Pretty much getting no love from anybody, which I think if we see him get a chance this year or next year, I like his chances.
Keep an eye on him for sure, especially in dynasty leagues. A name to remember. Billy in North Las Vegas, Nevada. We touched on this a little bit earlier, Ryan, but he writes, do you guys feel like John Brown is a good proven player coming off a bad year, bounce back candidate? Your thoughts on John Brown, Ryan? I don't think you're very bullish on him.
No, I'm not too bullish on him. I think he's an okay player. I think he's a decent player. He's very fast. His routes are better than average. I don't think his hands are very good. And I think that he'd be vying for the number 3 wide receiving spot in the Cardinals offense. So I'm not that high on John Brown.
Yeah, Fitz and David Johnson are clearly the guys you want to get there. Brown
exactly.
Going later than those two, obviously, but maybe not late enough yet for him to be a value. Jimmy in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric and Ryan. Are you concerned about Theo Riddick this year coming off a bad injury and returning to a much more crowded backfield than he left? Great show. That is Jimmy in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thanks for emailing us, Jimmy. Theo Riddick is a guy that I think we've touched on. We've talked more Amir Abdullah on the show over the last couple of months, and Riddick is a guy that we haven't touched on. But we know what he does. I mean, he's a pass catcher. He's a guy that players have always loved. Drafting to, in PPR formats right now, he is going at the 802 in FFPC leagues. That seems a little bit low to me, but when you consider what Detroit's been doing, they have Abdullah coming back. We saw what Zach Zenner could do last year. He's still in the mix, and then they felt like they weren't good enough yet, so they went out and got Matt Asiata as well. Now, say what you will about Asiata. He's not that talented. He's just a touchdown guy, and he may not even make the team. Okay, fine, but they still went out and signed him. So what do you make about Riddick coming back to this backfield that seems much deeper than it was when he got hurt last season, Ryan?
For sure, yeah. I like Riddick as a player quite a bit. I like Amir Abdullah as a player even more. But I mean, they have, 9 running backs on their roster? I mean, obviously they can't keep them all, but Like, I just can't see any one of them getting enough volume to be fantasy relevant even, any more than 11, 12 points a game. And, especially, Riddick is a guy who catches a lot of passes. That's where most of his value is. And if he's got hand injuries, I don't know if that bodes well for him. I've gotten rid of Amir Abdullah in the two dynasty leagues I've had him. Still really, really love his talent. But I'm a little worried that his upside is capped just being 185 pounds or whatever he weighs. And I'm not sure he'll ever get a full workhorse load. And especially he went with Riddick and Asiata and Zach Center and Dwayne Washington all being there. So I'm staying away from this backfield despite liking all the players.
And there's nothing wrong with that. You have too many talented players there. It's tough to zero in on one for fantasy, so that makes a lot of sense. Tom in Flint, Michigan, what's up, guys? Are the Sharky vets in high stakes willing to be bag holders on Frank Gore again this year? Thanks for the email, Tom. Frank Gore, it seems like a different sect of people write him off every single year, Ryan, and every single year it seems like the bar to be a top 12 running back gets a little bit lower, and Frank Gore always seems to sneak in the back end of that top 12 landscape. Is he a top 12 guy again this year? Is he the type of guy that if you draft him at his current spot, which I'm going to look up right now, you can actually get Frank Gore at the 8-10 in FFPC leagues right now, so he's going fairly late for what we think is going to be a starting running back in Indianapolis, a high-powered offense. Is he the type of guy that you would invest in that part of the draft, Ryan?
Yeah, I hold the bag. I hold the bag in a lot of stocks, but I don't think I'll be holding the bag on Frank Gore this year. He always does finish right around that 12th overall spot, but because he stays healthy every game, and just there aren't a lot of running backs who do that. If you're pitting his points per game against the rest of the running backs around that spot, I don't think he is particularly close. He'd probably be around running back 20, 25 or so. But he does stay healthy every year, which is really where most of his value is. Him being 20 or 32 or 33, you can't count on it, honestly. So I'm staying away from Frank Gore despite liking him as a player. I like his situation. I think that in his spot, I think Marlon Mack would do well. I think that Christine Michael would do well. Say what you want about those guys. But I like Frank Gore. I'm just not drafting him in any of my leagues.
Let's see. Neil in Orlando, Florida. I know he's climbing up draft boards, but what round would you be comfortable drafting Mike Gillislee, the starting running back for the odds-on Super Bowl favorites? Thanks, gents. That's Neil in Orlando, Florida. Mike Gillislee. Haven't brought him up yet tonight. What are your thoughts on him, Ryan, this year as far as what kind of numbers he's going to do in that Pats offense?
I would say that Mike Gillislee is probably the most underrated running back so far this year. If he does get the LeGarrette Blount role, I do see him scoring upwards of 10 touchdowns this year. And I think he's a much better player than LeGarrette Blount. And I am an Oregon Ducks fan, so it's pretty sacrilege for me to say that. But he certainly has a lot more juice than LeGarrette Blount. And he looked really, really good for the Bills last year. I think that if he can get over 40, 45% of the rushes in New England, I think he's going to dominate and be maybe even in the back half of the RB1s this year. I know his upside is a little capped because he doesn't catch very many passes, but I'm not sure he has to in that New England offense. And they tend to run the ball a lot more than you would expect, despite having Tom Brady. If he doesn't get that role, if he has to split carries with Rex Burkhead, then obviously he's not going to be as good as I'm thinking he's going to be. But I kind of see them using Rex Burkhead in a different role on special teams and possibly as a wide receiver even. And So I like Gillisley a lot. I've got him on all my dynasty teams. I've been getting him in the 12th and 13th round for a long time in these drafts. I know he's going a lot sooner now. I think he's going around 7-12 now. But I've been taking him.
He's costing you a 7th round pick right now.
Yeah, I've been taking him around early in all of my drafts, and I've gotten him in pretty much all of my drafts. And around the seventh, late 7th round is probably the earliest I would take him. So if he gets any lower, I probably will stay away. But I've already got him on a ton of my teams.
Rob is telling me we have time for one more email tonight. I think it's a pretty quick one. Pat in Newark, New Jersey. Which 6th-round receiver do you guys like best? Edelman, Marshall, or Diggs? That is Julian Edelman, Brandon Marshall, Stephon Diggs. Ryan, which of those three, we talked about Edelman and Marshall a little bit, but which of those three would you be taking with your 6th-round pick if you were set on a receiver there?
Well, I think Marshall is being overvalued quite a bit. I do somewhat see an Andre Johnson situation, although I don't think that Brandon Marshall is done talent-wise. I just don't like him as a second wide receiver in that Giants passing game. And Diggs, I think he's a wide receiver 1, and I've been taking him in all of my drafts as well. So I think this is the year that we see Stephon Diggs become a wide receiver 1.
Digging on Diggs is tonight's co-host, Ryan Thurlow, a winner of more than $20,000 in the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Great job tonight, man. Excellent stuff. Great insight. We certainly appreciated having you on. I wish you nothing but the best this season in all your drafts. And I guess I will see you at Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas this year. It'll be great to meet you in person.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And I want to thank you for having me on. It was really fun. I had a great time. And I want to thank you for doing this podcast too, because it keeps people like me interested in high stakes fantasy football. It gets more people to the site and playing on the site, and it's a really fun podcast. So I just want to say thank you for doing it.
Very kind words from you, gentlemen. You are a scholar as well. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for the kind words, man. We will talk again soon.
Okay.
Ryan Thurlow, ladies and gentlemen, FFPC $20,000 winner. Great job by him tonight. Fantastic stuff. If you want to be successful in drafts this year, I think you got a lot of keys to the cars tonight on doing that. So thank you to Ryan for coming on. And that is going to do it for tonight's show. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Ryan Thurlow, the FFPC, Rob, Bryce, and, of course, all of you for tuning in. Dave will be back next week, as well as our guest, 2016 FFPC 2500 auction champ and 2017 Pros vs. Joe's participant and Toyota Fantasy Football Hall of Famer John Rozek joins us live next week. Sign up for the Football Guys Players Championship and the main event today. Register for those stats and dynasty. Scott Engel and the Hall of Fame Hour is up next on Fantasy. Your weekend starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by MyFFPC.com that was broadcast live and heard around the world. Eric and Dave will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from a guest much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
Him again, the sound the engine in is like a bird. You see fireworks and Corvette tires skirt the boulevard. I know how you work, I know just who you are. See, use a bitch, your almost probably switches out your DNA.
I had the NBA Finals game on in the studio tonight, and I thought it was almost over with because I looked at the score and it was 109-93 with 1:10 left. It's still the third quarter. Does anybody play defense anymore? Offense wins championships, people. Have a great weekend.
Rush into Old Navy. The entire store's on sale up to 50% off right now. Want to save even more? Redeem your super cash now at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Better hurry, though. Tomorrow's the last day. Excludes clearance, gift cards, register lane items, jewelry, today and 2-day only deals. Rush into Old Navy. The entire store's on sale up to 50% off right now. Want to save even more? Redeem your super cash now at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Better hurry, though. Tomorrow's the last day. Excludes clearance, gift cards, register lane items, jewelry, today and 2-day only deals.